In our collection in the Aga Khan Museum, we are privileged to have a set of objects once belonging to the Mughal emperors of South Asia, things that they prized enough to put their own seal or mark on. These are a range of items made in different places and times, and it's fascinating to think about these famous, towering figures in history, the emperors Jahangir, Shah Jahan, and Alamgir, once handling and admiring these very same objects you and I can also admire and examine up close in the galleries. The first of these is a late 16th century manuscript. It contains the stories and illustrations of a text called the Anvari Soheili. The text is in Persian, and it consists of a series of animal fables based on stories that had been passed down for centuries and circulating between India, Iran, and the Arabic-speaking world. These stories were crafted as a way to provide advice on governance and ethics to rulers and their courtiers. A total of 107 stories were arranged within a framing narrative of a conversation between a ruler and his advisor. Each of these stories is illustrated in the text, beautiful vignettes that not only convey the main points of the narrative, but that also capture details of daily life in the late 16th century in Iran. Interestingly, this manuscript is thought to have been created by a painter named Sadiki Beg for his own use and pleasure. This information comes from a rather informative colophon, the name for an inscription at the end of a manuscript text that tells us when and where it was made. In 1618, therefore not long after the manuscript was completed in 1593, another inscription was added at the front of the manuscript, saying that it had been given as a gift to an emperor named Jahangir. Therefore, the manuscript had somehow traveled out of Iran, for Jahangir was ruler of the Mughal Empire of South Asia, neighbor and rival to the Safavid kingdom where Sadiki Beg was situated. Jahangir was emperor between 1605 and 1627, but before he even took the throne, he had established his own paintings workshop, indicating his lifelong interest in books and paintings. Both from a point of view of the contents of this volume, a classic text of Persian literature, and the quality of its illustrations, made by a top-notch artist, this manuscript would have been a gift worthy of Jahangir, and it appears that it stayed in the Mughals' treasury for several generations. This next manuscript was probably made for Jahangir himself rather than being collected by him. Although we cannot definitively prove it, there is lots of circumstantial evidence to this effect. The colophon at the end of the manuscript indicates it was copied by the famed calligrapher Abdurrahim al-Haravi, known by the name of Amber Pen. We know that this Amber Pen was active at the Mughal court during Jahangir's reign, and based on the style of the paintings, a date of about 1604 has been suggested for the completion of the manuscript. The text itself is the collected works of the poet Saadi. Born in the 13th century in Shiraz, Iran, Saadi took his pen name in honor of his patron Saad ibn Zangi, ruler of the province of Fars, and the two are shown in this imaginary scene in which the poet, in the black and white striped coat, presents his work to the ruler. The poems are accompanied by 23 lush paintings. Two of these have been ascribed to the Mughal artists Dharm Das and Hiranand, meaning that their names have been written underneath the paintings, as seen in this folio, where the name Dharm Das has been noted in red ink. While we presume the manuscript was made for Jahangir, we know for certain it was in the possession of his son Shah Jahan, who ruled as emperor from 1628 until 1658. In the public mind, this emperor might be best known for his architectural commissions, which include the Taj Mahal, one of the most famous buildings in the world. But based on the objects of art in his collections, we know that he had an eye and a strong appreciation for many different types of art. His seal has been added to the first page of the manuscript, on the reverse of the first page of text. Another object that we know once belonged to Shah Jahan is this ewer or pitcher that was made in China in the early 15th century, therefore over 200 years before it arrived in the Mughal treasury. This type of object is very well known and highly prized in the Chinese sphere. It was one of dozens of such types made at the imperial kilns for the Ming-era monarch known as the Yongle Emperor, who sent them out to all parts of his kingdom as a form of cultural diplomacy. How we would love to know where this object journeyed from the time it was made until the time Shah Jahan added his own mark to the object, an inscription with his name and date, 1053 in the Hijri calendar, converting to the year 1643 to 44 in the Christian calendar. It must have had many interesting stops along the way between China and northern India, where Shah Jahan, or perhaps one of his ancestors, acquired it for their collection. Once in the Mughal treasury, it joined dozens of other fine Chinese wares, blue and white celadons and other exquisite ceramics representing the top end of Chinese production, and including several pieces that were centuries old by the time of their acquisition, meaning that the emperors were looking to acquire very specific types and that the provenance and history of each piece was just as important to them. Finally, we come to a rather different sort of object, one that seems to have had a more practical use than representing the heights of artistic achievement. It is a copy of a text called the Book of the Images of the Fixed Stars. This text was written in the 10th century by a scientist named As-Sufi, who had been appointed court astronomer in Shiraz, Iran. It describes the 48 constellations known as the fixed stars, based on but commenting and updating the work of Ptolemy, the ancient Greek astronomer. Long after As-Sufi's death, his work continued to be copied and studied by astronomers, for it contained valuable information about the size, location, and associated folklore of each of the 48 constellations. These notes were illustrated with images of the constellations and the main stars within them, carefully labeled and annotated. Each constellation was shown twice, once as visible in the sky to us standing on Earth, and once as visible from an imaginary point in the heavens, looking downward. While the names and configurations of some of these constellations were based on traditions specific to the Arabic and Persian-speaking worlds, some remain immediately recognizable to us, since the European way of cataloging the stars also derives from the ancient Greek one. You might know these two, for instance, as Leo and Scorpio. We believe this copy of As-Sufi's text was made and illustrated in Isfahan, Iran, sometime in the 1640s or 50s. But once again, information found on the first page of the manuscript tells us how it traveled to the Mughal treasury and then continued to be inventoried there for several decades. The note scrawled on the left side of this page says that it was presented by someone named Muhammad Hadi to someone else named Fazail Khan in the year 1104 Hijri or 1692 to 93 in the Christian calendar. As indicated by the seal below the note, and from other such seals found in imperial manuscripts, we know that Fazail Khan was librarian to the Emperor Alamgir, son of Shah Jahan, about whom we've just been speaking. Alamgir ruled between 1658 and 1707. After his death, the manuscript passed to his successor, Shah Alam I, and two of that emperor's librarians added their seals as well. These are seen to the right of the note. Together, these four varied objects tell us a lot about the Mughal emperors, supplementing the documents that our histories are typically based on. While it's one thing to know the basic facts of their lives and reigns, the lands they captured, or the laws they passed, we learn about an altogether different side of their personalities through their collections. What were they reading? What did they know about the lands where these objects were made? And what did they appreciate about each of these items enough to mark them? Having this highly personal point of connection to important figures in history is one of my favorite parts of being a curator.